Okay, hello and welcome. Today I'm joined with Ali Bemben. She's a leasing manager for leasopoly.ca. She has rented thousands of places and written thousands of leases and gone to the landlord tenant board for hearings. She does it all. She is here to spill the beans on what's what in the world of rentals these days. All right, Ali, thank you for joining me today. And we're going to talk about the rental market. And you deal with the rental market every day, right?
Yes, I do. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And so, Ali deals with a bunch of rental properties. She's been doing this for years, has written many leases, dealt with many tenants and evictions and landlords. And I don't know who's worse sometimes, the tenants or the landlords. But anyway, so we see a lot of talk right now about rent prices declining. And I have charts too. And they're not like dropping like huge amounts, but they are declining. And I see it in the national numbers on rentals.ca, and I see the number of leases ever, growing out there, or places for lease, new listings and whatnot. And so, I guess my first question is, do you see it in your daily activities when you're, dealing with properties?
Yeah, I definitely do see it. I think the data will show that it's a little bit lower than what I'm seeing in the everyday. So for certain properties, we're seeing a 10 to 20% increase or decrease, I should say, depending on where it is, especially in newer builds. We're seeing longer vacancies and the prices are definitely decreasing as opposed to what they were maybe in 2022, 2023.
Yeah, I see like tons of places like just especially new builds, like you said, they're sitting on the market, and there's like you go to neighborhoods and like the whole neighborhood is like seems like it's for lease, or it has been for lease at one point. And and I've seen it too, like where you'd have to pay, say in certain areas in Niagara, you'd have to pay $2,600 maybe for a small detached, and now I see those places for like $2,400 and whatnot. So
yeah. In the townhomes as well, same type of thing. We were seeing them go for about 24 for a little bit, and now some are going as low as 2,100.
Yeah, because it was like you were going to pay $2,400 for a townhouse for a while there, and now that's completely changed. And it's not just a seasonal. We do see seasonal things, right, too. But it seems like the seasonality's out of it now, and it's more of a long-term trend. So I know you can't talk specifics here, but I'm sure you hear the juicy details sometimes when it comes to like owners and landlords. Like there are landlords like that are in good positions, and then there's landlords that are in bad positions. So like, and again, I know we're not getting into specifics, but like you see like landlords that have you ever seen in the past landlords lose places to the bank or to the builder, they can't close or something like that?
Yeah, I've seen it. It doesn't happen as often, or at least in my experience. We definitely see owners that are not cash flowing like they used to. Mm-hmm. Anything that's closed or that's been rented out in the last few years specifically, most owners are not cash flowing every month. Yeah, like a negative cash flow about $300 for most owners, and then if you're paying condo fees on top of that, some are getting upwards of $1,000.
Okay, yeah, and now do you find a lot of owners, or some of them that would be in that situation, like they try to, and I've seen it, they try to base these market rents on what they need as opposed to what they're going to get, right? And I guess that leads us into our next subject, but like the biggest mistakes. But on that specific subject, like a big mistake would be pricing for what you need, and we see it for sale when homes are for sale too, right? They I need this much, and I always say it doesn't matter what you need, it's what you're going to get. So I guess you'll see a lot of that all the time, not even just these days, but you've probably seen a lot of that in the past too, right?
For sure, we see it all the time. And those owners just end up sitting with vacant properties for a lot longer than they need to be. So we always try to push people towards market value, but we definitely see a lot of pricing based on need, for sure.
And it doesn't help when it's dropping either. So
yeah, exactly.
Now, with regards to time on the market, again, I know it goes through seasons and stuff too. Are you generally seeing places sit for longer, or is it not really affected the days on market yet?
I think they are sitting for longer, but that's again due to pricing. If it's priced well, we can still usually get it rented within 30 to 60 days. But yeah, the properties that are rented or listed too high, they're sitting for longer than they need to be.
Yeah, there's just so much competition out there. I just posted a chart today with the number of new listings for rent or for lease on MLS. 2015 compared to now, and it was like 80,000 on the Toronto Real Estate Board in 2015, and now it's 194,000 for 2024. So you have like way more than double the places for rent, and I don't think our population's doubled in Ontario since then. It's increased definitely, but it hasn't doubled. It seems like everybody and their mothers wants to be a landlord these days, or has bought into this real estate bubble. And what do you see the biggest mistakes before you get involved, obviously, because you get involved at certain time periods or certain time frames in that process sometimes. But what do you see is like the biggest mistake a landlord or a new landlord or whoever it is, an inexperienced landlord, I guess I should say. What's the biggest mistake you see them making when like leasing at a house or writing a contract or whatever the case may be?
I think it's just not understanding or even reviewing the Residential Tenancy Act. There's so many rules surrounding leases, and the number of people who have never even glanced the act, haven't reviewed the proper documentation that they're supposed to have, it's astronomical. So not understanding the act, writing up leases that are not enforceable and thinking that they're protected just because somebody's signed on them, and then just not understanding the market and seeing kind of what other people are pricing at and assuming that's the price that they're going to get, which is, again, most often not the case. It's a lot of inexperienced people leading other inexperienced people.
I didn't know that was going to be first. I don't know, but I'm guessing like screening has got to be up there for a lot of landlords. It's like a decade ago, it was so different, the market, like the way like tenants didn't know as much. It wasn't as complex, it seems, and now it's like everybody knows everything. Actually, I think we had somebody. I didn't confirm this, but one of the landlords I work with, I got their house for sale, and we were communicating with the tenant for showings, and they were like reading me the riot act from the Residential Tenancies Act 2006. I'm like, and the owner's like, they're using ChatGPT to tell you those answers.
And they probably are, but honestly, most tenants know their rights nowadays. A lot of times more so than the owners do. Okay,
so yeah, so it's tough, and we work together directly a lot of the time, and I know, like, I'm not doing this daily. Ali does it daily. That's all she does, and I have to like call and ask Ali like the process. I'm like what form? How do we word this? Like, it's very specific. Like, if you don't do this every day, it's tough to do. You have to literally talk to somebody or hire a paralegal or something, right? It's a process.
For sure. The forms specifically are a big issue at the LTB. If you fill them out incorrectly, and there's a fatal flaw, they will throw it out, and you'll have to start from scratch.
All right, so the Landlord Tenant Board. I know there was huge delays like during COVID, and you attend different landlord tenant boards also, right? Sometimes they're in the region where we are in Niagara, sometimes they're in Toronto. So like, what was the wait times like, say 2 years ago or whenever it was at the longest point?
I would say the longest point you were looking at about a year for an L1, which is an eviction for a tenant that's still living in your unit but not paying rent.
Wow, so those bills must have been huge from those tenants. And now, what is it now like here in Niagara where we are, and say Toronto? What's the wait times now?
They're pretty similar now. For L1s, it's about 4 months. For something like an L2, which is maybe a tenant that didn't pay utilities, it's about 7 or 8 months. And then something like an L10, which is to collect money that a former tenant owes, you're still looking at about a year for those.
Wow. But either way, like by the time you get your N4s and your N5 or your N whatever's out to these people, it's still like 6 to 7 months by the time you can actually evict.
Yeah, if you're doing everything as quickly as you can be, you're getting your hearing in about 4 to 5 months, and then you have to consider that it's going to take the LTB anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks to actually issue the order. And then if the tenants don't pay or leave, then you have to schedule with the sheriff, which is another couple months on top of that.
Yeah, and the sheriff, actually, you said there was a wait time with the sheriff too, right?
Yeah, the wait time with the sheriff, I think still it's about 2 or 3 months.
So one of the things that people don't realize, new landlords, when they go to this landlord tenant board, which is some sort of social justice tribunal in the first place, is that the tenants have a lot of help there, where the landlords have nothing unless they hire their own legal help, whether it's a lawyer or the paralegal, right? So, but the tenants, they have some counsel there that helps them?
Yeah, so depending on their availability, but I've never been there when they haven't been available. Tenants are entitled to meet with tenant duty counsel for free before your hearing is called. So they can go and get free legal advice, advice on how to approach the hearing prior to them actually having to step into the hearing room. And that's something that's totally separate from mediation, which is where two parties can sit down and try and work something out together. But this is just legal counsel provided for free for the tenants.
Yeah, and nothing for the landlords. Now, we kind of, everybody seems to like, we talk about this, and I'm not saying you are, but in general, we talk about like the tenants always being the bad guys, right? But it's the landlords are the bad guys a lot of the times too. So going back to like talking about mistakes that landlords would make, what are the biggest mistakes you see tenants make when renting a place? Obviously not renting one of your places, but there's certain tenants, and I see that like a tenant would make a mistake, like whether it's lying on an application or being too honest on an application and getting rejected because they have a little puppy or something. Like so yeah, with a tenant, and again, I see it probably more than you because you don't actively work with tenants, right? Showing properties. You show your own listings, but not where we would work as an agent. We'd work, and you got to make sure you have all the credit check and all the paperwork done. But we see a lot of the times these tenants getting rejected for reasons that they have too many kids or they have a pet or something like that. So I guess and then if you don't declare it, they can't. The landlord can't do anything about it when you move in anyway. So I guess it's a tough question to. I guess.
For tenants in general, like, is there something that they should specifically look out for when they're trying to rent a property?
Yeah.
For sure, anyone who's asking for money before they are willing to show you the place, or before you sign a lease, you should stay far away from that. Read over your lease agreements. If there are illegal terms in there, question what they are, how reasonable they are, how likely it is to be a problem for you in the future. But there's a pretty standard practice for renting a property. You should show the property, you should collect the application, you should do your vetting. And then once the lease is signed, that's when you should submit your deposits and other types of things like proof of utilities. And it should pretty much always be in that order.
Yeah. And most tenants don't, like a lot of tenants don't know this. They're just blind going into it, right? So it's tough. What's the most common reason or common reason for eviction that you face in your business, and what you've seen over the years?
It's far and away non-payment of rent.
Non-payment of rent.
As far as just notices that you send, late rent is very, very common. Most of the time that does not lead to eviction. Most of the time a tenant is going to pay their rent before the termination date on their N4 notice. But that's the most common notice that you're going to send, and having to actually follow through with an L1 eviction filing is the most common filing as well.
Now, you have a very hard job. A lot of people don't realize that, like the stuff you have to deal with. Actually, you said you're putting out fires all day today. But it is a tough job, and it's not tough just because you're dealing with the tenants, right? It's tough on both sides of the spectrum. And I guess a lot of people don't realize that. And a lot of landlords, they don't realize. A lot of landlords think that, especially these days when in this real estate boom where they really didn't plan on being a landlord, they just plan on buying a house and making lots of money and selling it one day. But they don't realize the cost of owning that home is more than just renting it out and tenant. Like it's a home. You need to maintain this home, and the tenants. And I see with what you deal with in our discussions that there's certain levels. Like some tenants think they're staying at a hotel where you have to come and deal with everything, and other tenants they're hands off and they'll do whatever. So would you find in general like there's a lot of landlords out there that are not prepared for these unexpected expenses, especially big ones, or they all have this worked in their plans?
No, I think experienced landlords understand that it is expensive to have a rental property, but a lot of landlords think that there shouldn't be any expense in between tenants or for their property in general. At the very baseline, you have to pay for cleanings, minor repairs, painting, things like that in between tenants. And then you have to remember that this is a home, so it needs regular maintenance as well. The biggest thing that we see are HVAC systems and appliances. A huge amount of issues in general, just with maintenance, especially if it's super hot, super cold out. The other thing is there's residential rental licensing, which is starting to become more popular. So that's quite expensive to get your license to begin with. And then you have renewals every year or 2 years. And
you're talking about at the municipal level, right?
Correct.
So so that's becoming, it's like an Airbnb license, but it's just for a regular rental and you have to, I know there are inspections at these places also.
Yeah, they say it's to protect the tenants, and I think in some cases it probably is, because there are landlords who don't maintain their properties or they have way too many people in there. But whether you have a brand new property or a 50-year-old property, you have to get the license regardless. And there are inspections, and then upon your renewal, you also need, in some cases, things like an electrician to write off to sign off that everything is good in the unit as well. So there's a lot of costs associated with that.
I would say like an owner living in a property would maintain it and has that pride of ownership, and it would just make sense that that home would be maintained better or more thoroughly than a tenant occupied home. Is that what you see? And like even an exterior, I drive around neighborhoods and I can just say that's a tenant, and it's not just because there's students living there, but I have this perception what I see that so generally speaking, do you think that owner occupied homes are maintained overall better than tenant occupied properties?
It's a mixed bag, but I would say in general, yes, tenants don't maintain their homes in the same way that an owner does. But it's also, there are certain parts about maintaining a home that just cost money. And a lot of times tenants don't want to put the expense out for that. You can have a really clean tenant who doesn't want to have their lawn aerated and overseeded every year, or weed control or things like that. So it's a mixed bag, but in general, yeah. Why are they going to put all this money out to make this home? And then I've seen it before, and then the owner's like, my home looks beautiful, I'm going to sell it now. Like, this is what happens. And then one other thing I noticed, like in the newer neighborhoods, I see like this big ratio of rentals. Like it's like every new neighborhood, especially in these suburban areas, and I'm sure in the condos in Toronto too, and all the new condo buildings, it's like this unproportionate ratio, like say like 25% of the homes out there are rentals. Like in new neighborhoods it seems like it's 75% are rentals, and I guess you'll see the same thing, and especially with condos too, right? Yeah, I would agree. In my experience, especially recently, it feels like over half of them for sure are rentals, and sometimes more, and especially in the buildings. The buildings, a lot of the time, it feels like almost every unit they're of renting at the same time, and they're closing it at the same time as well. So it becomes very, very competitive.
And I think there's this misconception with owners that think they're getting a new property, it has this warranty, and there's nothing to do. Meanwhile, there's no fence, there's no finished basement, there's no blinds, there's sometimes the appliances aren't fully there or installed. Air conditioning units sometimes they don't come with. So yeah, there's a lot of issues with new homes that owners don't always account for, and I think that I've seen it myself, right? I'm sure you see it.
Yeah, it's expensive to get it up and running most of the time. Like you said, appliances, blinds, none of that stuff will be included. So right up front, it's a huge expense.
So lastly, I did some research, and I have done my research because people ask me, and again, I work directly with Ali and Leaseopoly here. Actually, their listings, like if you look on MLS, my name's on these listings. But now when I look, it seems like most property management companies, they want to kind of make their money in the beginning, like load up on fees, like we're going to charge you this much, and then you have to pay for MLS. And I've checked around, and I've talked to some other property managers, and it seems like, yeah, they're load up on the fees in the beginning, and Leaseopoly doesn't do that, and I know this personally. So how is your fee structured? So and I'll give an example of like another company. So another company will say, well, we're going to charge you like 1 month's rent plus a leasing fee, which is like 1 month's rent is usually for the MLS part of it, but you're paying a whole month's rent. And then they charge you like this big leasing fee that might be equal to another month's rent, and that will cover advertising and screening and whatever. So like they're getting like thousands of dollars usually, and this is how they do it, as opposed to client retention from what I've seen. So like, what would your fees be in the front? Are they front loaded, or are they like more of a client retention based fee?
For sure, it's client retention. Like you said, I think most management companies are banking on the fact that they're going to have tenant turnover year after year. So every time they put a new tenant in, they can make that large fee up front. Whereas our goal is to keep tenants in as long as possible, because that's better for the owners. The less turnover you have, the more money you make in the long run. So our fee structure is just a percentage of your monthly rent when you are collecting rents, no fees during vacancies, and then for MLS listed properties, if there is a cooperating commission, you pay only the cooperating realtor. We don't take an fee for that part.
I guess lastly, sorry, I think that I said lastly, but now I'm going to say lastly, what do you think is the biggest benefit of hiring a qualified, competent property manager?
Yeah, I think so many people buy a rental property thinking that it's going to be a passive income, and the only way for it to be passive income is if somebody else is managing it. It is a job, whether it be a full-time job or not. It is a job to have one property, and then more so if you have multiple. But in order to get your property rented in a market that's super competitive, you want somebody who understands the market and who can adjust quickly. To keep your tenants in as long as possible, you want to have somebody who can maintain that tenant relationship while, ensuring that you're protected on the back end should anything go wrong. And then a huge thing is if there's ever anything with the LTV. The LTV is a very scary place for most people.
Yeah.
Super intimidating.
They don't smile there.
They don't smile, and they have a lot of discretion on how they want to handle things based on how they're feeling that day. So even though there are very clear laws and regulations, how they rule is really up to them. So you want someone who's experienced in being there, who comes prepared, and who ensures that every piece of paperwork is filled out correctly and in a timely manner, because if you don't do that, it can take a 6-month process to a year process or longer.
So before we go, I just want to give the viewers the range of the area you cover. So you cover from the greater or the Golden Horseshoe area from, say, Niagara, Hamilton, up to downtown Toronto is kind of your service area?
That's correct.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, Allie's information will be in the description. It will be down below her face there. And if you're looking for a good property manager, contact Allie or book a call with her. She has, you can book a call right from the website. And I will see you at dinner tonight.
Thank you so much.